Welcome to the Sigma Empath podcast, the rant edition. This is where I just allow myself to ramble and talk about relevant issues that relate to the empath condition, the neurodivergent, ADHD, OCD, anybody that isn't a neurotypical basically. And I want to talk today about loneliness. It can be very, very painful. And loneliness is open to interpretation. It's relative, like most things. It's on a spectrum. How do you really define loneliness? And something that empaths, for the most part, experience a lot of loneliness. So how do you manage loneliness? I want to dive in I just Googled loneliness. This is the AI overview of what the term loneliness means. And if it's on the internet, we know that it's true. It says loneliness is a subjective feeling of isolation or lack of close relationship. It can be described as a physiological mechanism that motivates people to seek social connection. And this is where it gets really interesting. The impact of loneliness. It can affect your concentration, your sleep, your appetite, energy, and mental and physical health. And this is why this is a major talking point for the empath. Loneliness accompanies us throughout our life for the most part, and it starts at a very young age because we don't fit in, we don't belong. And we seek connection. The empath in particular is desperate for connection, and so we don't find connection. And one of the easiest things to become is hyper self-independent, where you just tell yourself and program yourself that you don't need the world, and so you live a life of isolation. You might become an artist. You seek professions where you can work in solitude. And a part of the reason why we seek this type of safety and protection is because we don't understand how the world functions. We don't relate. We don't connect. We are misunderstood. We are oftentimes alienated because of our authenticity. We say it like it is. And all these factors, we find ourselves living very lonely lives. And for the most part, I can speak for myself here. Do chime in and let me know when it comes to aloneness and loneliness. For the most part, I choose isolation. I choose to be alone for the reasons I've already talked about. I don't have to deal with what I view as the superficialness of society, the hypocrisy of society, the lack of understanding, the lack of open-mindedness, the judgment, the superficial chit-chat. I did a reel recently, a short reel that highlighted how what we hear when people have these superficial water cooler conversations, it's just wah, wah, blah, 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 blah. It's too much for us. So I've chosen a heightened level of isolation. And 90% of the time, I feel good in that solitude. And let me know if you've chosen solitude, if you're comfortable with solitude, if you're happy in your solitude. 90% of the time, I am. It's good for me. It's healthy. It allows me to recharge my energy. As an introvert, that's what we do. It also allows me to sit with my thoughts. Most empaths, most introverts are very self-reflective. We like to take time to evaluate our presence in the world, how we show up, how we feel about ourselves, how we view certain interactions, our opinions of society, our takes on morality. We are oftentimes very cerebral. Also, very much here, we're connected to our emotions. We understand, we relate, we observe, we acknowledge what we're feeling, what the world is feeling. And so you're in this level of loneliness or isolation. And then at some point, the isolation, self-chosen, self-inflicted if you want, isolation, the noise, or rather the silence, suddenly becomes deafening. All of a sudden now you realize I actually crave, I need a friend. I want somebody that I can be intimate. And when I mean intimate, I don't mean just the sexual aspect. I mean the closeness, the emotional closeness, the intellectual closeness, the physical closeness, the spiritual closeness. You just want to be there with somebody that feels safe, relatable, similar to. And you can't find it. And then that's when loneliness creeps in. You just want to be with somebody who's like you. Let me know if you understand this feeling, by the way, if you understand loneliness, if you experience loneliness. Now, again, loneliness is relative. It's on a scale. Some people can feel lonely because they've been partying all week and they love to party and they're extroverts and they have to spend one night at home, and that one night at home they feel lonely. It's all relative. And I can't say that that person's loneliness is less validated or is more painful. Loneliness is loneliness. But again, for the empath, it's a recurring theme for the most part. And in that loneliness, you can get too cerebral and you start playing certain scenarios over. Very detrimental, very toxic. Because if you're self-evaluating, that dark voice can sometimes creep in and take over. Well, nobody likes you. Ah, you're difficult. Oh, you're complicated. That narcissist was right. And all these things go through your head. And to add to the loneliness, you start feeling bad about yourself as a human being. Well, why am I lonely? Nobody likes me. There must be something wrong with me. And in that loneliness, as you go deeper and darker into that sense of lack of self-worth, self-doubt, self-questioning, you might start to feel a level of self-loathing, anxiety. Anxiety is something else that comes on a spectrum. For some people, anxiety is a tightening of the chest, a challenge with breathing. It can just simply be a bit of a cramping in the gut. It can just be a basic increase in heart rate through a level of fear. It can be to the point where you need to jump out of your skin. You need to yell. Your body needs to yell. You panic. There are different levels of anxiety. But bringing it back to the loneliness, what can one do to minimize this pain? Addiction is one way where people might relieve this sense of loneliness. And what is addiction? Check out one of my other podcasts. I brought in an expert on addiction who himself has gone through addiction. He now runs a sanctuary, Damon D'Amato. He runs a sanctuary and he helps people heal from addiction. But here's the thing about addiction, and I'm going to look up the definition. But we only relate addiction to all these negative things like alcohol and drugs and sex and bad behavior. But addiction is also the workaholic. That's an addiction. There are a lot of positive, the overachiever, that's a form of addiction. There are a lot of addictions that seem positive, but they are still addictions. Here's what the dictionary.com says about addiction. The fact or condition of being addicted to a particular substance, thing, or activity. So it's a desperate need for something, and oftentimes it's to soothe. It's to minimize the pain, the suffering, the hurt of whatever it is that's hurting you. Let's go to the cliche addiction, alcohol or drugs. It's a soothing. It's a way of minimizing not having to face this pain, this inner torture. And so addiction is this very complex thing, but let's go back to the loneliness. Through our loneliness, we can dive into forms of addiction. So how do you minimize the pain, the suffering that comes with loneliness? I can share some of my strategies. I would love for you, for the sake of the community, what are some things you do to navigate your loneliness? Well, here's the first thing that I do. Through those feelings of loneliness, when I'm feeling depressed, sad, broken even, to the point where I'm either physically crying or my soul is crying and I have trouble getting out of bed and I don't want to face the world and I feel worthless. I used to try and fight those feelings, and guilt and shame would come in. How dare you feel those things? You should be grateful for so many things. Look at your life. You've got so many good things going for you. What's wrong with you? And then so I would convince myself that I didn't have the right to feel these things, and I would suppress and suppress and suppress, which is not healthy. What I've learned to do is I've done my inner work in the last 10, 5, 2 years. It's a continual journey, by the way, healing and self-discovery and empowerment. I have simply learned in my moment of loneliness, in my moment of woe is me, self-pity, I've taught myself Allow yourself to be in this emotion. Allow yourself to feel this. Because it's a warning sign, it's a red flag, it's a green light. It's letting you know something is out of sync, something is out of alignment in your life. There is something that needs to be addressed. There is something you need to work on. It can be internally, it can be changing the external environment. Either way, it's to let you know something is out of line. And what could be out of line is your inability to accept. Acceptance. Acceptance of, I have no friends. And if you can find peace with, I have no friends, it's really hard, but if you can find peace with, I have no friends, or I have no really good friends, or my circle of friends is so small, it's almost non-existent. If you can find peace and acceptance with that, it will minimize the loneliness. And so when I get into those moments of loneliness, I just remind myself, Vital, you don't have many friends. And in part, you've chosen that. And today you're feeling down, allow it to be. Go lie down, go sleep for a couple of days. And I'm okay with that now. I allow myself to be the emotion, knowing that this too shall pass. It might last an hour, it might last a day, it might last a week, but it too shall pass because our emotions are like this. So allow yourself to be the emotion, a level of acceptance, which is really hard. Let me know if this is something you've tried, if it's worked for you. What are some other options that you have entertained, that you have discovered along your journey that you can share with the community to help empower others who are chiming in? How do you manage loneliness? Because loneliness can be devastating. It can be devastating, very painful. So acceptance for me is number one. Be the emotion. Number two, once I've identified in the emotional and mental state that I'm in, I either accept and go to bed and lie down, or I have a series of go-to action steps, activities that I know will give me the chance to get out of it. I have a checklist of things that I know that I need to do to optimize my mood. Meditation is one of them. Gardening has now become a recent thing, and this is what happens. It's about getting into, if you've read Eckhart Tolle, The Power of Now, this is really what I'm doing. Through my meditation, through my gardening, I paint. What that allows me to do, I walk my dogs, I go out into nature, all of those activities, but I have to be intentional about them. But all those activities bring me into the now, into the moment. The power of now. Eckhart Tolle didn't come up with the concept. He just wrote a fantastic book about it called The Power of Now. Eckhart Tolle. I find activities that bring me into the now. Anxiety is said to be a couple of things. A fear of the future. And when we're lonely, the fear is, am I going to be like this forever? Am I never going to have a friend? Am I never going to have somebody that loves me? Am I never going to have a level of deep emotional connection? And that's what invites the anxiety. The other part about anxiety, based on fear, is the control factor. We can get anxiety because we feel we don't have control. And that invites fear. Because we want to control the environment, which goes back to my initial point, acceptance. But through certain activities, I then bring my entire being into the now, into the moment. And it might last 20 minutes. It might last 5 minutes. It might last 4 hours while I'm on a painting, while I'm creating an online reel. I'm talking to my friend, playing with my dogs. Whatever that relief time is, my soul has been soothed. So my healthy addictions are meditation, connection to nature, playing with my dogs, gardening, painting, working out. Those are my healthy addictions. Find healthy addictions for you that soothe and nurture your soul during moments of loneliness. Everybody, thank you for listening, chiming in to the Empath podcast, the rant edition, where I just randomly talk about anything. If you want to dive deeper into helping you along your journey of self-discovery, empowerment, living authentically, Connect with me. I do life coaching. I have endless clients whose lives I'm honored to say that I've changed. I've written multiple books. Pink is the Color of Empathy being my most recent, arguably my most impactful. The feedback is I could have never imagined. Strangely, I almost never wrote this book. I was afraid. I was so afraid to be this vulnerable. Pink is the Color of Empathy. I also help people with recovering from narcissist abuse, childhood abuse, and anybody in general who just decides, you know what, I want to be me. I want to find the courage to live authentically. Reach out, connect with me, follow me, subscribe. Everybody, thank you for listening.